Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you here with us today. We have a new webinar in our series. Today, we are here to talk about the truth about skills-based transformation. We just want to take the fluff out of this conversation and focus on the results. And to do that today, I am joined by three esteemed speakers that have a lot of insights and expertise in this space. And so we're going to start this session by hearing a little bit from each of them about their background and what brings them here. The first one is Caroline Effinger, Director of Consulting at Lightcast. Hi, Caroline.
Awesome. Hi, Elena. Thanks for hosting this today. Really excited to be here. I am the Director of Consulting here at Lightcast. I've been leading this team for the past 5 years or so. And I get the pleasure of working with some really awesome data scientists, economists, subject matter experts. And our team works directly with organizations to help them tackle some of their most pressing issues. Obviously, a lot of that is what we're talking about today, how to best leverage skills and strategic workforce planning. But we also work really closely on many specific initiatives like talent acquisition strategies, like buy, build, borrow decisions, talent development strategies, like creating career pathways, geolocation strategies, like site selection, and other things such as competitive benchmarking and compensation benchmarking. So really excited to be here today and have this conversation.
Yeah, and you have a lot of expertise on the ground working with the customers, so it's great to have you here. And then for our next speaker, that's Michelle Hazelton, that's the VP of Products and Innovation at TalenTeam. Michelle, over to you.
Thanks, Elena. Lovely to be here. So I've been at TalenTeam since February this year, but skills and learning is not new to me. I was previously MD of Anders Pink. And we actually partnered with TalenTeam. So my relationship with TalenTeam goes way back, which has definitely helped over the last few months. So TalenTeam is going through a period of growth. And as part of that growth, we've partnered with yourselves, Lightcast, which has definitely excelled our proposition, and hopefully for you guys as well. But part of my roles and responsibilities at TalenTeam is to really help them to grow and mature the product operation and to bring in, much more in the way of AI enablement across our, across our product suite. So this is in our skills products, but also within our learning products. So, join us for other webinars to learn more about that.
Thank you, Michelle. And our third speaker, and it's funny because it's a panel of all women today, so that's a great representation there. We got Alison Ettridge, who's also at Lightcast and is our Director of Global Talent Intelligence. Alison.
Thanks, Elena. I was thinking the same thing. It was lovely to see a full panel of women. So thank you for having me today. Yes, I'm Alison Ettridge. I've spent 26 odd years in the world of talent in some way, shape or form, but particularly in the last 15 years, helping global enterprises to navigate the changing labour market in order to deliver commercial results. So a real focus on how the impact of the labour market can provide context for better and more informed decision making. I've been talking about external labour market data, talent intelligence and the future of work and skills in a no-nonsense, no-fluff style for probably the last 5 years. And for those of you who are now watching the recording live, forgive me, this part is recorded and that's entirely my fault because during the live webinar, I should be having my foot operated on. So, but everybody else that you see here will be there answering the questions. So forgive me if you see a recording button and are feeling cheated.
Yes, and on that note, let's get started. But before we start, let's spend a few words for those who don't know Lightcast and TalenTeam, explaining why we're talking about this and what we're doing in this space. So from a Lightcast perspective, Lightcast is the global leader in labor market analytics. We have over 20 years of experience analyzing and answering questions about the labor market. We bring together the most comprehensive data set on job, skills, and everything that you need to know about the labor market. And we work with organizations right across from private sector, education, and the public sector to navigate changes in the labor market and make sense of questions such as around strategic workforce planning and talent intelligence. So that's kind of like the experience we bring to the table. And then, Michelle, do you want to do a little bit of an introduction about TalenTeam as well?
Yeah, so TalenTeam has been around for more than 12 years, and as you've heard, we have a suite of products, and we're innovating all the time. We're listening to our customers. We're looking at the SAP roadmap because we're actually an SAP Gold partner. So what we do is, we're looking at the products that they're taking to market, and we're looking at how we can facilitate organizations to implement those products quickly and efficiently through our implementation services, but also through our suite of products which enable more automation through different tool sets that we've created. So we have our a flagship learning experience platform, Blend, but we also have a raft of other products to help companies embark on skills transformation, but also just generally around HR and learning.
Yeah, and that's very exciting because I think the blend of all the experience that you bring to the table fits very nicely with the topic that we are going to cover today. So, as we said in the introduction, today we're going to be talking about skills-based transformation, and the idea is to make this webinar as practical as possible, taking the fluff out of this conversation. We will be focusing on the power of skills for efficiency and alignment, as well as looking at the strategic impact of a skills-first approach, so what that can bring to the table. And we will also be talking about the real-world ROI of going through a skills transformation project. So this is very much a conversation. Each of us, I'm hosting, so I'm actually leaving everybody else to actually bring their contribution. But we will be answering some questions related to these topics. But first, we need to know a little bit more about the context. Why we are here today, why it is important to talk about skills and skills transformation right now. And for that, I think the best person to do that, to kick us off, is Alison. Alison, why now? Why do we need to talk about skills now?
Oh, thanks, Elena. I love this question when we're talking to people because, as I said earlier, I've been in this world for 26 years. We were talking about skills-based hiring 26 years ago, right? So I think it's
really,
yeah, we really were. Like everybody was like, skills is the next thing, and it never really turned into anything. But now actually it's got to, and that's because we're living in this completely unprecedented era. There's so much going on in the labour market right now that there isn't one person that has worked in or lived in a labour market that's doing what it is now. And I think this is really important, particularly when we're talking to chief execs and CHROs. Often decisions are made on a gut feel, and that gut feel is based on experience, but nobody's got experience of this labour market. So,
right.
And if we think about some of the things that are going on, so we've got not least the broader environment and some political instability. So let's just leave that and part that there. But if we talk about the labour market specifically, massive shifts in demographics across the world, which we'll probably go into a little bit later. Everybody wants the same people with the same skills, so the competition for talent is kind of worse than it's ever been. The AI transition, green transition, all of those impacting on what's going on. But also think about politics relating to migration and what's happening on the movement of people around the world. Then you can start to see how all of these things combined at once mean that there are fewer people to do the jobs that need doing. So you've got to find a different way of looking at it.
So there's fewer people doing the jobs, but also there's another trend around how all these other factors are accelerating the pace of change, isn't it?
100%, yeah, and really fast change, which I have no doubt we'll go into a little bit later. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Alison, you were saying so this is an unprecedented time, and you've mentioned demographic changes. You mentioned a little bit about uncharted territory. How's this playing out in different parts of the world? How is it playing out?
Migration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's not felt evenly across the world. I think that's fair to say. But if we look particularly at just sort of major economies, 80% of countries in the world are seeing a slowing in the working age population, right? 80% by 2040, right? And that is not that far away if we start thinking about it. But there are some regions, so particularly Asia and the Middle East, where that slowing is twice as fast, right? So those are also places where we're seeing the population slowing more quickly. So there aren't enough people in that working age population. If you
Right.
look at the EU, right, we're downright shrinking in terms of working age population. So I think, and this is we talk about this a lot at Lightcast when we're having these conversations. Yes, there's changes to the skills that we need, but the reason it's important is that there aren't enough people to put the bottoms on the seats for the work that needs doing, because of
Yeah.
these changes.
But it's funny, isn't it? Because, scanning my LinkedIn feed, I've seen posts recently from women in their 50s
Mm-hmm.
who, have perhaps gone through redundancy, or perhaps they're looking for, a minor career change. And they're struggling to get jobs because when they sit in front of people for interviews as a woman in their 50s, they're seen as being no longer relevant within the workforce. But if the workforce is shrinking, then how is that? So maybe
Everyone should
we're
be
on the
relevant.
cusp of them having to change their mind on and actually look at these people in a different way. Like, actually, you come with a wealth of life experience and traditional work experience, and maybe you might need upskilling in some of the skills that the younger populations have just naturally acquired through being digital natives. However, but it's funny, is it? It doesn't feel like it's properly proliferated all areas. The stats that you're talking about there.
No, 100% it hasn't. And as a woman in her 50s, right? I'm pleased to not be in that particular feed at the moment. But if you looked at me, and I tried this before. I don't know if it'll work. I'm going to try it and we'll see. If you think about Alison, and then you think about me made up of different Lego blocks, and
Yeah,
then think of each of those different Lego blocks being skills,
yeah,
you could start to see how you could move those Lego blocks around. And so I
yeah.
think you're so right, Michelle. This is still, skills-based hiring is still quite nuanced and still quite new in the world, but even
Not
though we've
fully
been talking about it
understood.
for such a long time.
Yeah.
But different industries are feeling it in different ways, Caroline, I think, isn't it? Yeah, that's true.
Well, I was going to say, this is why it's more important than ever right now, is because there's fewer people to do the work. So if
Yeah.
you want to fill your job, you need to look for as broad of a talent pool as possible. So doing that through the lens of skills is so powerful, rather than just saying, oh, has this person done this specific job before? Or do they have this
Yeah, yeah.
specific degree? You just say, do they have the skills or skill adjacent skills to
Yeah.
do this job? And then you have a broader pool, you can fill quicker. We'll talk about ROI later, but that's where that all comes into play and why it's so important right now.
And you just made me think of a few examples, actually, because I've been joining as many customer calls as I can and prospect conversations at TalenTeam, being relatively new to the organisation. Well, kind of new, new at the level I'm at. So in one conversation, they talked about so they needed to recruit in because they didn't have the right skills internally to develop. So and this was a bank, and it was within their private banking teams, and they needed people who had the skills to deal with customers who were I don't want to say awkward or difficult, because that feels like I'm pigeonholing, but that you need a particular skill set to deal with high net worth individuals, and so they needed to look outside of their organization. So where did they go in order to find people who had those kind of skill sets? And they decided to go to the airline industry, to the first class cabin crews, whereby, they were used to dealing with high net worth individuals and therefore had acquired the communication skills, the diplomacy skills, and so on and so forth in order to, be able to transfer from one industry to another with a very similar skill set. And of course, before more than 26 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long, more than 26 years ago, but just recently, we wouldn't have known about that because we didn't look at job roles at that level of detail. We'd have just looked at cabin crew, first class cabin crew and private banking. We wouldn't have made the connection between those two.
No, 100%.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to think about it as the Lego blocks that you were talking about, Alison, because when you get to that level of details, you can really see the similarities and difference between different jobs. But also you can start, you're also able to measure the pace of change in terms of the skills that are being required. And that's also something that I know you talk a lot about.
This is when it gets, well, you talk a lot about it then as well, but but this is where it gets, I think, frightening, is that these 26 years have gone, or Michelle, but actually the average job has seen 1/3 of its skills change in the last 3 years.
Okay.
And 1 in 4 jobs have seen a 75% change in their skills in the last 3 years. So whilst we're looking at the person as a Lego, when we break down Lightcast data and the labour market data, and you break that down into Lego bricks, what we're seeing is that the shape of jobs are changing massively. And some of that is about the rise of AI, and particularly, of course, about GenAI as a macro trend. But we can talk about where that's it. So some of it is about the transition to a green economy. Some of it's about cybersecurity, but actually all of it is about every job. So I think that's where it starts to become, the why now starts to become really obvious when you start thinking about those things in detail.
It's funny you mentioned the green jobs point, actually, because I was listening to a Google DeepMind podcast the other day, and
Wow.
the host is, I can't remember her name. She's a PhD in something. Anyway, she's fantastic. She's a real storyteller, but obviously have very, very intelligent guests on their podcast. And they had a guy who was talking about using AI to predict sort of to interpret large-scale environmental data. So this will help them to model climate change. It will help them to track biodiversity. And, they're using data. Before they started doing this at Google, they were using data from the 1960s on mapping out forests and it's crazy, isn't it, to think that now they can take that local environmental data, put it into an AI model, and then predict what will happen through different environmental changes locally on the ground in the future, and therefore mitigate those change. So yes, the green jobs, no wonder we're seeing an increase in the demand for green jobs.
Yeah, and I love it. And Caroline will be able to talk to this or speak to this a little bit, I suspect. But I love it because this isn't, the skills change is no longer about particular jobs, right? It's that all jobs piece. And if you think about greenification, that's a new word. I think I might have made that up. Anyway, if you think about greenification, then actually the jobs are, if you're in procurement now, you need to be able to think about how can you make sure there's a sustainable supply chain, and are we thinking about green all the way through the supply chain? If you're in sales or marketing or talent acquisition now, you need to be able to use GenAI, right? So it's everywhere, right? It's kind of permeating through all jobs at the moment. But what an opportunity! Right? What an opportunity for us to change things. It's very exciting.
Yeah. That's the thing, I'm so embedded in AI, in learning and HR, but I'm really curious as to the benefits, because there's so much negativity around it, and I live with a skeptic, so I hear from him constantly about the negative. And yes, the horrible people will get hold of it and do horrible things with it, but then there's all this other really amazing stuff around healthcare and climate change, and how we can make a positive change with all that, the interpretation of the data through AI that we just simply couldn't have done before.
And one thing I'd also love to touch on is, we've done a lot of research at Lightcast about the impact of GenAI, and obviously we talk a lot about those really specific technical skills and the power of it. But one of the other big
Yeah.
things that we're seeing is really like the rise and importance of those other like business enabling skills is typically what we call them. GenAI is really powerful, but it's still at the stage where it requires human oversight for a lot of things, especially where there's
Yes.
that have like high risks, like things like in the cyberspace. Therefore, workers who are using it, they need to lean into their critical thinking skills, their collaboration skills, their adaptability skills. And all of those things are really important to driving business value. For example, we did a deep dive into some technical roles, like say Python developers. And what we're seeing is like in the future, those people are not necessarily going to spend their entire day writing code because GenAI is really good at doing it. It can spit up, code for you in no time. But what they're going to be doing now is reviewing it, implementing it, doing code reviews, making sure they really have a deep understanding of what is the business problem we're actually trying to solve with this code. Does the code actually do that? How do we track success metrics? How do we see how this is implemented? So I think that's like equally as powerful as the technology itself, as these workers really needing to understand the context in which it's operating and the value that it's driving. So again, skills are changing across the board, technical skills, green skills, business enabling skills, but it's a really interesting time.
100%. And I'm sure you'll talk about this, Caroline, in when we're talking about skills-based strategies. But actually what you've described is also the same when you're doing a skills application, right? You can't just plug it into an AI box and go, there you are, it's all sorted and it's fine. You still need a human in the loop to go, does this make sense? Right, and let's think about it. So, and I think that's where loads of people can go wrong in this area, isn't it? It's just they think it's easy.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think on that point, you've all kind of like set out very clearly why we need to talk about skills transformation. And then the natural question that comes to me is, okay, but where do we start? How do we begin with skill transformation? Because it sounds like such a big project. How do we take the fluff out of it and make it practical? Caroline, what's your take based on the work that you're doing with the customers?
Yeah, no, this is something we talk about and work in this space all the time. And definitely like when you hear skills-based organization, it can feel kind of like a buzzword or something that's really like lofty or nebulous. So we really tried to put some structure around it and make it more practical, more tangible, more actionable. So a few things we like to call out, like right in the beginning when we partner with an organization and say, okay, what do you need to be thinking about along this journey? We typically think about 4 key pillars that a company should be thinking about, like 4 key things. So one is that business value. This is really should be your North Star that guides everything. Anytime you implement any sort of skills-based initiative or strategy, you need to make sure that it's actually driving business value. Skills need to be connected to business goals. That's how things are really sustainable in the long run. So that's really important. The other thing we talk a lot about is strategy and governance. Obviously, you want to make sure you're being really thoughtful and deliberate in terms of developing consistent and sustainable processes around skills. You can tackle one-off use cases, but those can quickly die if you don't have kind of a process and a governance in place in the long run. The third thing we tend to talk about is obviously technology and data. You need the right data, the right technology to be able to store and leverage all of your skills data effectively across the organization. So that's something you need to be thinking about. And then last but not least is the change management piece. And a lot of people don't think about that. But like anything, like if you want to become a skills-based organization, that takes change and it impacts real people and their lives and their jobs. So you need to make sure you have a plan to get buy-in from stakeholders, not just HR, but leaders across the business, your workforce. So again, that's really high level where we start. Make sure you're thinking about those 4 things. How are you driving business value? What's kind of your long-term strategy and governance plan? What's your data and tech stack? And then how are you communicating and really engaging your workforce?
That's a really
that.
nice.
Sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just like thinking that's so straightforward actually, if you think about those 4 pillars. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think whenever we're in front of clients, or potential clients, and they say, "Oh, we're going to become skills based," our first question is why, Because if you can't define that why,
Right.
you're going to go through a massive amount of change and potentially not deliver what you want to do and spend, these are not cheap transformation projects because they're transformation projects. So I think, to your point, Caroline, define the why right from, and if the why is we want to be better organization, define the goals that then determine the why.
Get those KPIs, connect that to ROI. Like you need that right from the get-go. Otherwise, your CFO is definitely not going to support this, in the long run. They want to see that business value.
Yeah.
And on that point, what's the timeline like for skills-based transformation? Because it's not something that happens immediately, especially in terms of seeing the return on the investments on it.
No, definitely. I mean, I think what we see is there's definitely a few different ways that you can get started. There's really no one size fits all approach because, again, becoming a skills-based organization, it's not just a switch that you can flip on and you're like, hey, we're good, we did it. It's a long-term, roadmap there. But when we partner with organizations, we typically see like 3 different entry points depending upon where they are today and where they want to be in the future. One is that long-term roadmap, really developing that structured process to make sure they're driving business value. They've got governance and strategy in place. They've got their tech stack lined up. They've got their communication plans. So developing that, multi-year roadmap is something that we do partner with organizations in doing. But obviously that's not for anyone, not for everyone. That's a large scale transformation. Some people want to start a little bit smaller and maybe they start with what we would refer to as like foundations. So just the foundational step towards really understanding your roles and your skills. So standardizing your role architecture, your skill architecture, to make sure you know what jobs do we have, what skills do we need in those jobs, how do we connect those to our employees. That's a simple way to just start to lay the foundation. Because again, you need that data to be able to act upon it. And then the last thing that we tend to see is like what we would call insights or like a specific use case where a company would say, hey, we are really trying to enhance internal mobility to fill this position. So help us figure out what are the skill adjacent roles that we have, how can we train our workforce internally to do that. So again, multiple different entry points that we've seen in working with clients on this front.
Yeah, and that's a good point, isn't it? Because, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Because one would think that maybe, when you ask the why, you need to have that kind of end-to-end vision of what skills is going to mean to you as an organization, right from recruitment through to, retirement. And based on what you're saying there is no, you don't need to do that. You need to have a valid use case where you can see a return on the investment, whether that be a bit smaller to start with, and then once you see the benefits, that begins to grow, and therefore you expand it out into other areas of the business and the value chain between recruitment and retirement.
And I was just going to say, I love being on a webinar. I haven't done a webinar with Caroline before, and it's brilliant because she says, I'm going to talk about 3 things or 4 things. You go, okay, I know when she's going to have finished that section. It's very good. It's very cool. But you talked a little bit about the foundational bit. So the number 2, the foundational bit, I think that's where people can get stuck, isn't it? Is they're like, oh my God, we've got 3,500 different job titles and, we don't know how many different skills. And then none of them talk to my SAP instance in any way, shape or form. And then none of them talk to the outside world. And it's like, but it is, I think that's how easy it is for this to be really complicated, right?
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about what that means, right? How, what's the kind of simple steps that people do there?
Yeah, no, I mean, we see this all the time. Companies will come to us and say, I have 3,000 employees and 2,500 distinct job titles. And we're like, okay, that probably doesn't make sense. Let's really look at the roles you have. There's probably a lot of roles that have different names, but they're performing very similar tasks, require the same skills. So it's really about understanding the roles and skills you have and standardizing that such that you can implement that into, SAP SuccessFactors. Obviously, we partner with TalenTeam for that, which is really great. And then you can say, okay, let's make sure that skills are driving L&D recommendations in our L&D platform. So they're really tailored to what role a person is in and what potential next step roles they have. Let's make sure kind of our Talent marketplaces is working really well in terms of finding good mentorship or project opportunities or things like that. So it's really just laying that foundation. Once you know your roles and skills, all of your other technology is so much more powerful.
Right,
Yeah.
because you can't unlock your downstream user cases unless you've figured out where all of that sits, right? And that's, I know TalenTeam do a lot of work in how do we help you unlock your downstream user cases for skills, because you've got skills data presumably in your ATS system, and you've got it in your learning management system, and you've got it in your talent management system, and you've probably got a different one in your workforce mobility system, even if because you might only have certain bits of the SAP Talent Intelligence Hub turned on, I think, Michelle, is that right?
Yeah, so yes, it's probably worth, as we've got an SAP audience, just kind of covering. So I'm going to use your technique here, Caroline, with there's 3 technologies that you need. So essentially, you start with Talent Intelligence Hub. So this has been around a few years now, and SAP have been raising awareness within organisations of Talent Intelligence Hub and what it's for, and it's part of your SuccessFactors subscription. Sorry if I'm wrong with that, I'm pretty sure that's right. So essentially, you can imagine that as being like the brain of your skills. So it's the central data, and it knows what people can do, what they want to do, and what the business needs. So you talked about, existing skills, future skills, and beyond future skills, or skills that are required more immediately and then after that. So then you've also got the second product, which is Job Profile Builder. So that's like a library. So a library of job roles, and it understands, what's involved in those job roles, what are the skills needed for those job roles. And then you have the third component, which is Career at Talent Development, which changed its name from Opportunity Marketplace and something else. So they've combined a couple of solutions into one. And that's like a sat nav for your employees. So that helps them to see what career paths are available to them, the skills that are needed in order to embark on those career paths. And it kind of guides their learning and development. So it's connecting the people data with the job expectations and the personal growth all in one ecosystem in SuccessFactors.
So sorry, go on.
No,
I was going to say, so that second piece is then the piece that Caroline was talking about in terms of making sure that the foundational data set is right.
Exactly. And that's where TalenTeam can come in, and certainly where you've been introducing us to the conversations that you've been having to understand. So of those 3 components, what do you have enabled, and what does your data look like that you have in those systems today? And TalenTeam can help to help improve that or implement those solutions if they're not in place, ready for the Lightcast data to then power it all and enable them to continue on their journey.
Cool. Sorry, I think I took us off on one and then sorry.
No, you didn't. I actually got a couple of questions for both Caroline and Michelle on this topic. And before we get into use cases, Caroline, one question for Michelle I had on what you were saying now is, what are the benefits of doing this type of skill transformation project? Because there's different benefits at different parts of the organization. There's benefits for the individuals, for the team, for the companies. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about the journey again that I mentioned before, so from a recruitment perspective, we can think about matching candidates on skills and not just titles. So I used the example of the hospitality. No, I've got multiple examples. So the cabin crew and the private banking, but there's also things like, hospitality and aviation is another one. So people can go from one to the other because they have a similar skill set, or contact centers and customer success, because if you think about what people actually do, they're transferable in their roles. So that opens up the door for internal mobility, but also external recruitment in terms of, understanding the nuts and bolts of what's actually done within a job role in terms of the skills. Also, learning becomes much more personal and strategic. So, we understand what the gaps are, therefore we know what to encourage people to learn, and therefore, hopefully that supports people's aspirations because they know what the available career paths are, therefore they can acquire those skills and progress in their careers. Succession becomes more of a proactive planning exercise rather than a reactive somebody's going to retire next year. Who have we got? And then the internal mobility piece I've pretty much covered already around understanding truly what people do. And interestingly, actually, we've been having some conversations recently with a big client of ours. I won't mention them at this stage because I think this is a bit of a new area, but around skills that are being asked for by an organisation, but actually skills that people have, and how do we make companies aware, or their employers aware, that they have all these additional skills. And when we first started talking about this webinar, Matt, who unfortunately isn't able to join us today, said, I've got a skill that nobody knows about, I play the guitar. And we really wanted him to do an intro for us today, and how amazing would that have been?
I think you can look at Matt Me on YouTube and find he has published like albums. So it is a nuanced taste. I'm just going to put that out there, Matt. But it's
like now.
But it's interesting because I heard a term that started. I'm hearing this more often than not, which is how do we prevent underutilization of our current workforce. Yeah. And it's funny, isn't it? Because we talk all about, well, we haven't got enough people and there aren't enough people and it's really hard to hire and everybody wants the same skills. But that plays to exactly that piece, is how do we look at what else we could be doing with the people that we have.
And the future skills piece, because your research can help people to predict kind of where the labour market is going and where they need to be looking to acquire skills or upskill in the future. But there's going to be some curveballs in that come in, right? So if you've got a much broader understanding of people's skills, that might sit dormant for a while, but it could well be quite useful. And also just opening up other creative opportunities, like playing a guitar intro to a webinar, for example.
Not on the point about the guitar, but just what you were saying earlier, it gives like a nice segue in my mind to actually see some practical use cases. So Caroline, do you have any examples that you can share of how skills transformation projects have worked in practice?
I'm happy to talk about a few of those. And I think one of the ones that we've seen has been most powerful is an organization that came in with a very specific use case, saw those kind of immediate impacts in terms of ROI, and then came back to us for building that long-term skills-based roadmap. So this was a large retailer who came to us because they wanted to build skills-based pathways so they could make their entry-level roles more appealing by saying, hey, you come in at this entry-level position, maybe the salary isn't huge, but there's really targeted, tangible pathways for you to grow up within our organization into kind of manager level positions within their retail stores, which again, it was a need for them. They were having a difficult time filling those manager level positions. And they were also having a really hard time with retention. Those entry level people were leaving because they were like, I don't really know what's in it for me here. So they said, okay, we've got this business case we want to solve. They came to us and we helped to show them what these entry-level career pathways would be, what are kind of the next steps, what are the skill gaps that would need to be trained so they could make those transitions and really build up their store managers internally. And that, at the end of the day, saved them about an average of $13,000 per employee by developing that internally versus going out and hiring on the market with someone that maybe has more experience, more credentials, things that would warrant a higher salary. Obviously, 13,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but for a large retailer, when you aggregate that, it was about $7 million in cost savings for them. So you can see these small numbers really start to add up. So then they were like, hey, wow, this is really great. We see the really tangible benefit of ROI. So again, they came back and said, let's start from the beginning. Let's roll out skills across the entire organization. And that's when we said, okay, let's build out your change management plan. Let's make sure you have strategy and governance in place. Let's think about how data sits within your tech stack and where it flows and how it's leveraged. And obviously, we started with the business piece. I shouldn't have said that last because that's obviously the the first thing you want to talk about is what is the business value that you're trying to drive. So honestly, I think this was one of the most powerful examples, again, showing how you can start small and then go bigger. You don't have to do everything all at once.
But it's also right, payroll is a company's biggest cost, isn't it? You know, and it somehow gets lost, you know, and it's just like the savings that you can make are massive as a result.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and this
Go
is so
ahead.
much more accessible to organizations now, because if you think like, so a few companies came to mind listening to you then, and they were retailers as well. So Aldi over the years has been recognized in the UK here as being, you know, very good at bringing in kind of graduate level, fresh out of uni people and fast tracking them into management. And then, you know, so you see, like we here in the UK, we see a lot of people from like Eastern Europe and things working within the store. They're on the tills, they're stacking the shelves, but they've got this amazing training program to fast track them. Another one is like enterprise car rentals. So they have been doing that historically for years, but you can imagine the investment that they had to go through in order to do that in a more traditional way. Whereas now, this is so much more accessible for organizations and to embark on that, the smaller use case at the beginning, and then exactly as you've described, expanding that out across their organization.
It's a really easy way to get that quick win, to get that buy-in, and then see that really large scale impact when you start to roll it out across multiple functions and things like that.
Another way of thinking about it as well, actually, is the savings that you make from that first implementation or first use case can actually help to fund the further implementation. You know, just putting my business hat on there. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and Michelle, you mentioned it before, but Lightcast and TalenTeam partner together to work on these transformation projects. What's the value of the partnership? Why is it so important and central to these projects?
Well, I'm sure Alison will have things to say about this, but I'll do my best to articulate it in an acceptable way. So the way I think about it is Lightcast is, you know, the market intelligence lens. So it understands how skills are changing in the wider labour market. It provides that data on emerging and growing and declining skills, as we've talked about already today. But in TalenTeam is like the activation and implementation layer. So we bring that data to life within SAP SuccessFactors. We help to build the frameworks, and you know, we help to build the libraries and the job profiles. You know, I talked a little bit about some of the tools that we have. So an organisation who's going through, you know, this change may need to rewrite job descriptions, or, you know, in quite a lot of instances we see companies that don't have job descriptions, and we've built automation into that to help save a lot of time and effort. So that's just a little snippet of how we can help, you know, with the activation layer. So, you know, many organizations want to become skills based, so Lightcast is showing them where to go, and TalenTeam is building the roads in order to get there and to integrate with SAP.
I think, thank you, Michelle, that was really kind. I think that any organization, any SAP client who wants to unlock the power of skills, right, has a massive opportunity. But if you put bad data in, you get bad data coming out, right? In all of these cases. And in what other business function would you make decisions without the context of what's going on in the external market, right?
Yeah.
None. You just wouldn't, just the very idea of doing that would be mad. And so I think that, yeah, that's where this is really powerful. It's like, okay, we can get that underlying data set really grounded and make it talk to the outside world.
Yeah.
And the TalenTeam can help to unlock the power of having internal data and external data in the same language, right? And that's where magic can happen, right? Is when you can bring those two things together and make some really cool decisions.
And also, if you think about, like, along the skills theme, you know, the skills of TalenTeam and the skills of Lightcast are kind of complementing each other beautifully, you know, because we do very different things, but they're related, they're adjacent, and together they mean that an organisation can be successful in implementing skills.
Yeah, and on that point, I think we need to start wrapping it up, which it's a shame because we had way more questions and there's a lot more to talk about on this topic. So perhaps that will be a part 2 webinar, who knows, in the future about it. But I wanted to thank all of you. So Michelle, Alison, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us today. As we said, the webinar has been recorded, but we are all live on the Q&A, apart from Alison, to answer any of the questions. If there's any questions that we won't be able to get to during the webinar, we will make sure to get back to you following up after with the webinar. But yeah, apart from that, for now, thank you so much. Thank you to my speakers and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you for hosting, Elena.
Yeah, you're
Thank you so
fantastic.
much.
Yeah. Thanks, ladies.